Their recent wins in the UFC matches have brought the new and old Australian UFC fighters under the spotlight, with fans going on what's called the Della Mania after UFC 275 in Singapore. What a bunch of fighters the Oceania country is producing. Let's discuss the Aussie tsunami in detail. First up, Della Mania. While Ramazan Emeev has never been stopped in his 7 UFC appearances, Jack Della Maddalena knew he would become the first person to do that. And he did just that, but not without giving his Aussie audience some spicy entertainment. Della Maddalena vs. Ramazan Emeev in UFC 275 was a roller coaster of a fight, even though it lasted only half a round. The audience was barely blinking because every time they did, the fight seemed to shift sides. Emeev relied on his grappling expertise against the Aussie knockout specialist, almost achieving a back take before gripping his opponent's neck and wrapping him up in an anaconda choke. When the Russian performed a gator roll, taking the Aussie to the ground in what seemed to be a submission finish, but Della Maddalena is not one to accept defeat, and he didn't miss an opportunity to free himself, jumping right back into the fight, and that's when the tide changed for the final time. When asked about the chokehold later, Della laughed it off, saying, "I don't feel like the angle he had was right," which gave him the way to move. The Perth native struck a huge hook to Emeev's body, effectively stunning the sambo specialist. It was clear it hurt his opponent, but Jack waited 2 seconds until he was sure before landing a flurry of punches, as he did in his January UFC debut, where he won against American Pete Rodriguez in a TKO. When asked how he knew his punch had changed everything, he said, "Because hitting that shot felt real soft." Does that make anyone else feel queasy? But the point is, Jack Della Maddalena put Ramazan Emeev, a previously undefeated UFC fighter, down in under 3 minutes. Major swoon. Maybe now they'll use his descriptions in the next Wattpad Mafia novel. Tim Simpson, Jack's agent, has predicted the arrival of the Della era, and UFC Singapore was proof that Della Mania is very much real and very much understandable. When he asked when he wanted to fight next, the adrenaline-filled 25-year-old yelled, "If anyone pulls out tonight, I'm ready to go." He loves to render people unconscious, and he does it for himself. Dana White, the UFC president, has already declared Jack Della as special, but it turns out impressing him is not at the top of Maddalena's agenda. He just genuinely loves finishing his opponents off and does it because he believes that's the way a fight should end. Already regarded as the UFC welterweight rookie to watch, the rising 25-year-old is eager to establish himself as one of the division's greatest strikers as he headlines the group of 4 Aussie fighters competing on the Asian card, with a knockout rate sitting at 80%. Della isn't short of being Australia's next big thing. No, I don't care about reputations or anything like that. I want the finishes for me. Head coach Ben Vickers joked that the Aussie fella just loves to render people unconscious. Rather sadistic, don't you think? Next, devastating second-round knockout by Jake Matthews. Get used to seeing that. Jake Matthews' attacks were pinpoint accurate and lethal at UFC 275 in Singapore, as he smashed André Fialho with repeated punches that found a home on Fialho's face, taking full advantage of his reach against his shorter opponent. Following a scorching combination that left Fialho on his heels, Matthews swung a right hook that left the Portuguese fighter crumpled and sent him to the mat, essentially ending the fight. Fialho was still going forward and seeking to narrow the distance as he put some major pop behind his fists while taking some heavy strikes. But every time Fialho put up a strong combination, Matthews came over the crest with massive hooks and backhand blows that simply kept falling on target. Despite his astonished appearance, Fialho refused to back down, getting right back into action, but his eagerness to test his endurance against Matthews might ultimately backfire. After hitting Fialho with many blows in round 2, Matthews shattered him with a left hook that marked the major turning point. With Fialho stumbling toward the cage, Matthews just unleashed a slew of massive blows, including the right hook that saw him earn his first UFC knockout. The stoppage came at 2 minutes, 24 seconds in the second round. Following the win, Matthews declares his desire to compete in the upcoming UFC Paris card on September 3rd, as he seeks to build on this win, which moved his record to 4-1 in his past 5 outings. "Get used to seeing that," he said in response to questions about his first KO. Next, from underdog to celebrated victor. It's crazy to think that parts of the Singapore crowd actually booed at the start of this fight, with both fighters failing to make big moves against the other. Why? Because the rest of the 15 minutes of this one were downright chaotic, pulling the audience to the edges of their seats, wondering who will win. It was almost like the two were locked in a dance of two, albeit not a romantic one. Culibao faltered Choi with a barrage of blows in the opening round, then put him into the cage and proceeded to throw down. The South Korean, on the other hand, not only recovered his feet, but also replied, finally pursuing the Aussie around the cage while striking. The second round was just as fascinating as the first, with the highlight coming from Culibao felled his opponent again and followed it up with a massive knee. When the final bell rang, Culibao jumped onto the cage and pointed to a group of his fans in the crowd. The Australian now has 2 victories and a tie in his previous 3 fights, the last of which looked so much like the Culibao win that he was given a winner's bonus regardless. Although he went into the UFC 275 preliminary as an underdog, Josh came out with his best victory to date and made a $50,000 bonus in the process. How cool is that? Tyson Pedro squared up against the Villanueva in the UFC's light heavyweight category during the preliminaries of UFC Vegas 52. Pedro entered the battle on a 2-bout losing run. Having been stopped by Ovince St. Preux and Shogun Rua, Pedro had not fought since losing to Rua in 2018, undergoing 2 ACL surgeries in the meantime, and made his long-awaited comeback to the octagon in one of the card's most compelling matchups. Villanueva was also on a 2-fight defeat drought, having been knocked out by Marcin Prachnio and Nikolai Negumeranu. In this fiery matchup, one would have to go on to a 3-time losing streak, and we all know who that ended up being. Pedro started the battle with a lack of action, a leg kick after which both participants were cautioned by the referee for having their fingers flexed. They'd have to throw something for it to actually become an issue. Pedro had launched kicks in the first 2 minutes, with Villanueva pushing his jab before being hit low with a strike that brought the fight to a halt. Pedro re-entered the fray with a low kick followed by a body kick. Pedro eventually let loose a right hand followed by a knee square to the crotch. This time, Villanueva had a larger pause to heal. Yikes. Our condolences, Mr. Villanueva. As they got going again, Ike fired a right hand, and Pedro hit home with a leg kick. Pedro would land a couple more of those, and Villanueva was feeling them. His motion was hampered, which made closing the distance an issue, and just as the round was coming to a finish, Pedro got his hands up, wounded Villanueva, and sent him down with another outside leg kick. Villanueva's night was finished when right-hand strikes ensued. Next, the Reaper taking time off. Former middleweight champion Robert Whittaker promised fans that his best days are still ahead of him while reacting to news that he is now the longest tenured fighter to come from Australia in the UFC. Robert Whittaker made his UFC debut in 2013. Initially fighting at welterweight, Whittaker made the move to middleweight after mixed results left him 3-2 in the octagon. But he's come under fire for his decision to withdraw from his fight in UFC 275 to recover from injuries. He's up the top of the food chain for a reason, and I need to take that seriously, said the Aussie regarding his opponent, claiming he wants to be in his best form when he faces off with him. Whittaker sees the Vettori bout as a delay rather than a withdrawal. If they want to keep yapping, let them. In his 4th title bout, the featherweight champion will face Holloway for the 3rd fight at UFC 276 Las Vegas on Sunday, July 3rd. Volkanovski had won their previous 2 fights by decision, but his second triumph was marred with controversy, with many MMA experts claiming Holloway deserved the win. As he prepares for a huge trilogy battle with rival Max Holloway next month, the Australian UFC star says he isn't driven by proving the haters wrong, and if they stop doubting him, it'll be a bonus. But if they don't, then they can trash talk him all they want. That's a wrap for this video. Do you believe the Aussie supremacy in UFC fights? Which Australian fighter is your favorite and why? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.